welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany, and each week we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 15 of The Kill File. First off, I want to say thank you so much to those of you who are continuing to share The Kill File with those around you. Whether it be on social media or in person, it means more to me than you guys know, and our little community is definitely growing, so keep it up. Also, I had a thought and wanted to share it with you guys, and you can let me know your answer on any of the social media posts that will be out about this episode, or you can email me at thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com. So here's my thought. Would you or would you guys not like it if I started episodes with a little bit of true crime news that happened this week? Like, I won't be delving into a whole other story or anything, but would you guys like it if I started taking the first few minutes to talk about a case that stands out or is weird? Or if there's people that we already have known about that have been arrested or evidence found on bigger cases or what have you. Let me know if you want that or if you would rather me just jump right into the case. So that brings us to this week's episode, and it's going to be about a Greek serial killer nun named Mariam Soulakiotis, aka Mother Rasputin. I got the idea for this week's case from a brand new show that just started, and I was really excited to watch it because the main actress is someone that I love. And it also has my football team's tight end, who I also love. Know what show I'm talking about? Take a guess. Today's trigger warnings are murder and torture, and some brief mentioning of child torture. This one is definitely not a horrific case. I mean, it is horrific, but it's not going to be gruesome or heavy like other ones, but it's interesting. Also, I wanted to note right off the bat that there's going to be a little lesson in some of the religious aspects of this that I didn't know and had to research. So it's going to be fun to delve in and educate us all, which personally I absolutely love to learn. So here we go. Mariam Soulakiotis is a Greek Old Calendarist Eastern Orthodox nun, which is a mouthful. Which means this church follows what is said to be the Julian calendar and not the Gregorian civil calendar, which most Orthodox churches use. This also means that it affects the calculation of Easter, which is the day that Jesus allegedly resurrected. Fun fact, the Julian calendar was named after Julius Caesar, who had introduced the idea to ancient Rome. Also, in case you didn't know, because I didn't, Orthodox means, in a religious sense, that their views conform to what is generally or traditionally accepted as right or true, also what is established and approved. So we all know that religion has been around in some form or another since forever, and people give up their quote-unquote normal lives so they can devote themselves completely to their religion or their higher power. Right along with religion, there has always been, in some capacity, abuse of said religion or the power that comes along with it. We have heard this time and time again in true crime that people kill other people because their quote-unquote God has told them to, or they were chosen, or people in higher religious positions are preying upon people below them and saying that they're supposed to do one thing or another in the name of their religion. Then, of course, we all have heard the horrific stories of some religious figures being sexual predators or pedophiles themselves. Sometimes religion masks crimes that can go unseen for quite some time, if ever. And sometimes they're just swept under the rug in order to not embarrass the church or the religious group, which fucking infuriates me. In Greece, unfortunately, during the early 20th century, a sadist and her convent ultimately resulted in the sad deaths of upward of 500 quote-unquote devoted followers. So, who was this evil nun, Mariam Soulakiotis? The story of Mariam includes murder, fraud, negligence, torture, and greed. This all started when Mariam was just 23 years old, and she was introduced to Father Matthew, I'm going to butcher this, Kapithakis, a quote-unquote self-styled monk. I think that means like he was a self-appointed religious person. I also had to research what a monk/father means because I've obviously heard of monk, and I was forced into Catholicism when I was a child, so I knew what a father was, but when you put the two of them together, I didn't understand. Also, I thought they were different religions. No? Also, funny fact, until this case, I have been calling the practice of the Catholic religion catechism and not Catholicism because I've heard that word before and apparently that just stuck with what it was called to me, so that shows you how little I know about this religion. Or any religion for that matter. My family basically were quote-unquote devoted Catholics until after our first communion, which means you go through all these Sunday classes until you can take the body and blood of Christ, and then we usually got to be done. So I am by no means an expert, and also I am no longer Catholic. These are just distant memories for me. So what I was able to find from Oxford, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a monk is said to be a person who stays in a monastery and practices prayer and work apart from society, and usually lives alone or in an organized community so that they can devote themselves full-time to the religious life. A father is a priest who is said to be ordained and able to offer sacraments. For those of you who don't know what sacraments are, they are a little bit different depending on which religion you're speaking about, but I knew in Catholicism it means consecrated elements of the Eucharist, and the Eucharist means the body and blood of Christ, which in Catholic churches used to be these dry bread cracker things and wine. I'm sure it's changed by now because having a drink of wine as a youth was weird, let me tell you. So a priest is able to offer the quote-unquote body and blood of Christ to its congregation. Also, a priest is able to do something called anoint the sick, which I've heard of, but I didn't know what that meant. And it's the practice of praying or using healing oil. The oil is said to symbolize the presence of God at a time of great physical and emotional need, and assures the person receiving this of God's love and the healing presence of strength and hope, which is kind of cool. Now, if you're talking about the Christianity sacrament, then it refers to imparting divine grace, like a baptism or penance, which is a volunteer self-punishment with the expression of repentance, or like remorse and confession. I didn't know that Christianity also practiced this, but of course we all know this as part of the Catholic religion. Although I have never seen or heard a confession or have seen a confessional in real life, just on the movies. And of course, movies know everything. So Mariam, up until this time, was working inside of factories and worked on farms. There isn't much to be said about where she came from, except she came from a poverty-stricken Greek family, and that she was born in Karatia? I know I butchered that, I'm sorry. Greece in 1883. When Father Matthew met Mariam, it was during a time that he was actually struggling in his life with doubts and about the doctrines and tenets, which basically means the principles or beliefs, of the Greek Old Calendarist Church, the Orthodox denomination, to which Father Matthew belonged. Apparently, he had denounced the teachings of the Old Calendarists, and Father Matthew formed a new sect, and it was called the New Calendarists. After breaking away from the orthodoxy, he went on to build a monastery and convent so that his followers would have a place to worship. Well, Mariam was absolutely captivated by Father Matthew and by what was said to be his quote-unquote alternative ideologies, so much so that she left her family and her job so she could help work in the new convent. This convent seemed to have started merely innocently of any crimes at first. At one point in time, Father Matthew was having health issues and was declining, and it was said at this time, coupled with the fact that Mariam was said to be, quote, unquote, having a strong character, Mariam was able to quickly gain more responsibilities at the convent. She eventually went on to hold the position of abbess of this church, and for those of us who don't know, an abbey is a building full of nuns, essentially. So the abbess, I hope I'm saying that right, is the one who's in charge or the head of all nuns. Mariam was in charge of recruiting new members into the convent, and she was in charge of the daily management of the church as well. It was said that by the time the founding father of the sect unfortunately passed away in 1939, Mariam had already earned a reputation for being ruthless and rigorous. Reports that have been given by followers of this new convent, the New Calendarists, Father Matthew built this new sect for two purposes. One was to secure financial aid for the New Calendarists movement, which was said to be flourishing, and the second purpose was to praise the Virgin Mary. To each their own, I personally have always struggled with the thought of Immaculate Conception. Anyways, now that the sect was following the charge of Mariam, who, by the way, was now deemed Mother Superior Mariam, the convent's mission seemed to focus solely on financial investments. It was said that new members were, quote, required to relinquish any money or property they possessed, adhering to the church's vow of poverty. Along with the serious sacrifice of worldly possessions, members had to vow to rid themselves of any evil, and they also had to show their commitment to their beliefs of the new church by first confessing all of their sins, and then they had to do periods of silence and fasting. I would be curious why Mariam needed these people to prove their beliefs so strongly. Like, besides giving up their worldly possessions and money, I would dare to say that this almost seems as though it's about power and not necessarily about their faith. When members came to join the newer convent, they immediately had to endure 40 days fast of penance. This was then followed by a week without sleep. Oh my God, can you imagine? So they say you start to hallucinate like after 2 or 3 days without sleep. I cannot imagine a week. So I actually looked this up because I was curious about the facts of the sleep deprivation, and I read that after 36 hours, hallucination may begin. After 48 hours, you can start feeling depression, and after just 72 hours, hallucinations can intensify, and you can actually have delusions. Now, I myself am not a religious person, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the quote-unquote amount of devotion that someone has for their deity between themselves and their deity? Maybe I'm just naive, but the only time that I've ever heard that people have to prove their devotion to another human being, whether it be for religious purposes or not, has been either in a cult of some sort or an abuser has made someone prove their devotion. I feel like maybe giving up money and possessions would suffice, no? It seems like a little overkill, but what do I know? This source further went on to say that all of these practices are similar to some rituals that are undertaken by a lot of mainstream religions, but it was Mariam's motive that makes her someone who is remembered throughout history. At the end of the 40 days of fasting and week of no sleep, these members would be promised to have eternal salvation and lasting peace if they sign over all property to the convent. Seems like a rough start to a lifetime of peace, no? It said for those who refused to hand over their properties, well, these poor people were forced to take in narcotic drinks and tortured as well. That seems a little counterproductive. Like, here, take some narcotic drinks to ease the pain of what I'm about to do with you. Weird. Just seems like torture to me. Silence was also enforced, and anyone who spoke was then, quote, beaten in the face with a shoe by Mother Mariam. That does not sound like a good time, and my face would straight up be fucked up, as I cannot stop talking to save my life. For some reason, everything I say feels so damn important, and I gotta get it out. I would be walking around with a permanent Nike symbol on my forehead, like, worth it. When someone was actually converted, they became brides of Christ, and then told that they were guilty of moral adultery and damned if they left. That guilt will get you. It was said that along with being a very strict abbess for the church, that she would also use atrocious methods to obtain financial assets from new members of the church, and these included food and sleep deprivation along with corporal punishments, aka physical pain. She apparently deployed what were referred to as agents, and these agents would go all over Greece trying to find people who were quote-unquote willing to be converted and wishing for eternal salvation. Just the fact that they had to use the word willing made it feel as though it was already a bad thing. Like, I feel like there's a big difference between eager to join and willing. The new members of the church were forced to pray for hours and hours and hours, and they were also, quote, subjected to blackmail, beatings, and even torture. Mariam was also clever enough to target families of wealth because she knew that their estates would bring plenty of money that could indefinitely maintain the financials of the new church. This made me wonder, how did she get people to go along with her ideals and make them want to, quote unquote, join this church? I would want to know what's in it for me. So it said that Mariam's strategy was not a complicated one. It was known to new members joining the church, aka the new calendarists, that they were entering a life of devotion, isolation, and that they would have little, if any, contact with their friends or families of what was said to be their previous and sinful lives. I could never do any of this. I'm too selfish. I'm like, I want to enjoy my one life while I can, way too much to devote everything to something like this. The members' isolation was said to cut them off from everyone or anything who would come to their rescue if someone had been alerted to the awful and horrifying crimes that were unfortunately being committed against them. Yeah, this sounds like a cult. So it said that many people who joined the convent didn't do so because they were such religious followers, but rather they were looking for medical attention. This quote-unquote cruel abbess offered free tuberculosis treatment to anyone, and she cited that the high altitude of the convent as a perfect location for someone who was trying to heal from an ailment. Unfortunately, it was known that she had no intention of really treating any patients that had tuberculosis, because if she had, then there would have been doctors at the convent to treat patients and sick people. That was not the case. The only doctors that were actually allowed to come in were only there to sign death certificates. Mariam's quote-unquote treatment plan was just bullshit that she used to defraud and pull one over on people. It wasn't until 1949 rumors started to swirl about what was going on over the walls surrounding the convent. Apparently, residents have even claimed to have heard screams and groans coming from the convent. However, it wasn't until 1950 that authorities had even been told about any possible corruption or abuse of power, and at this point, Mariam had already been in charge for over 10 years. Everything started to come to light when one of the daughters of a woman who had recently converted to the new calendarist convent had reported that the deeds to the lands that belonged to her mother had been signed to, guess who? That's right, Mother Mariam. This gave the daughter pause, as it was extremely out of character for her mother to do so, unless she was under extreme duress. It was said that the real tipping point was when authorities were trying to check on a Greek-born young woman who was from the United States, and she had been taken to the convent. When the police had broken in, they were unable to find any traces of Elena, the 18-year-old, that they were looking for. What they found instead would set into motion the uncovering of a corrupt convent guilty of many crimes, including murder. When authorities broke in, they found in an underground cell a woman who was said to be 70 years old, thin, malnourished, and starving. She was in a 4-foot by 7-foot cell, and she was bound with chains. She told authorities she was paying a penance and was living for weeks on just dry bread and water. I'm too fat for that shit. I would be pissed. After a decade-long uninterrupted occupancy of power of the church, Mother Mariam Soulakiotis was arrested on what was said to be a huge raid of the premises. According to one source, there was approximately 85 different police officers over the course of 2 days scouring the grounds of the convent. They rescued 46 children and several naked, malnourished elderly women who were said to be jailed in the basement. They found living followers on the premises, as well as unfortunately finding the remains of over 170 bodies as well. 170 bodies! What in the actual fuck? Oh my god. Mariam's trial began on September 4th, 1951. However, she wasn't charged with any abuse or deaths of members. Like, what? Mariam was also found in possession of $750,000 in cash And on top of this, they found that she held over 300 farms and house deeds, but she wasn't charged with this either. What the hell? I guess prosecutors felt that they wouldn't be able to get a conviction in relation to those crimes. The only thing that they knew for sure that they would get a conviction on 2 counts of quote-unquote illegal business activities. She was charged and convicted to these counts, and she got 26 months in prison for illegally exporting olive oil to Cyprus and illegally importing tires. Okay. The newspaper article from London actually stated that at least part of her sentence of 2 years was due to her keeping a young girl inside the convent and then telling her relatives she was dead. The newspaper also cited that out of 358 quote-unquote recent deaths, that 55 of them were from tuberculosis. If these numbers are believed to be true, then the number of deaths were on the higher side of what was thought to be happening at the convent. It was also said that Mariam made death quicker by fasts and penances. One account from a man named Mariam Soulakiotis, sorry if I didn't say that right, stated that his sister and brother-in-law who died from tuberculosis and that their 3 children were tortured horribly. He stated one of the children was hanged upside down several times and was forced to eat wood until he was unconscious. Now, I will say that I had to translate this article from Greek to English, so it said wood, but it could be a wrong translation, but it did say wood. When this child's father was still alive, the nuns would urge this father to infect his own child with tuberculosis, saying that if he lived, the child would become a bad man. They said that he would become the devil who would burn the monastery. First off, I wouldn't blame that child one bit for burning that fucking place to the ground. And secondly, who says that to a father? It's his son. And you're no fortune teller. Ugh, it's horrible. Seraphim went on to say that, quote, they said we had to die, that the cells should be emptied so that others can come and so we can go to heaven. So basically they wanted quick turnover and seemed to hurry death along for many of these poor people. There was one witness who was an elderly woman named Eugenia Margetti. I love her name. She described her own suffering with other nuns. She stated that Mariam ordered the nuns to remain in only their underwear, and she would assign a female associate to beat these nuns with a board. I just don't understand why. There were other nuns that were led to the woods and tied in their half-naked state to the trees. From the first investigation of Mariam, it was said the most common torture was to hang people upside down from trees with the purpose of expelling demons from their bodies, and this was to purify the believers. Young children were woken up with beatings, again to quote-unquote purify them. It was only after this that they could attend the divine services because they would be free from their demons and were able to perceive the greatness of the Christian religion. Ugh, I fucking hate that. Poor babies. They do not deserve this, and especially children. They're like the purest of pure, and how the hell would they already possess demons? One account stated that a woman's nephew, who was only 10 years old, was so hungry once that he licked a potato. As a punishment, they tied him naked all night in a stable, and when morning came, they found him passed out from fear and the cold. These poor children. One woman was said to have tried to leave, to which Mariam locked her in the dungeon with hardly any food for 6 months. And because of this, the woman died. 6 months. Oh my God. Another account was a nun by the name of Theodati, and she was beaten to death, unfortunately, which I'm sure there were many more of these. One of the newspaper articles that I had to translate from Greek to English went on to say that they took a quote from a newspaper called Eleftheria, and an article was published on February 6, 1955, that went on to say, we should all remember the case of this monastery where horrific things took place under the nose of the quote-unquote most blessed Archbishop of Athens and all of Greece. It went on to say that for years this place was a horrific den of disgusting ignorance and criminal unconsciousness. Then said, quote, an illiterate monk in collaboration with a beastly nun lured various naive and tired and mentally ill and uneducated people into this den slowly with methods similar to Hitler's concentration camps and sent them to eternal monasteries. Wow, I love how they compared this wretched woman to Hitler, and they're exactly right. These actions and this place that was supposed to be full of worship and what should have been good deeds was full of death, torture, heartache, and misery. Well, it said that even though in court she wasn't found guilty of any such crimes, the public, along with the media, had already condemned Mariam as quote-unquote Mother Rasputin. Apparently, the media had a field day with this story, which I can understand why, but also more people came forward with evidence against Mariam. With the help of this new testimony from people, the prosecutors were able to charge Mariam with several new crimes. Mariam had been accused of the murders of one monk, 3 nuns, dozens of counts of embezzlement, forgery of wills, abuse, torture, extortion, as well as negligent homicide. This is just what she was charged for. I can't imagine how many deaths she was responsible for by having a quote-unquote associate doing her dirty work. These charges came with lots of testimony as well. The prosecutor on the case said, quote, if anyone goes through the files of these crimes, he would be so shaken that he would never recover. During this trial, it was said that at least 127 men and women died under fast and penance in the monastery. Holy crap, no pun intended. Can we just sit with those charges for 1 minute? Okay, this woman of supposed faith and supposed sisterhood was not only caught with close to $1 million, and that's a shit ton of money, but also 300 different deeds to homes and farms? What the hell happened to the members giving up their worldly possessions? Isn't she a member? Ugh, the fucking hypocrisy. So, I had to make sure that I got my shit straight, so I looked up the actual purpose of a nun. And it said, quote, nuns live, minister, and pray within the enclosure of the monastery. Nuns also take solemn perpetual vows publicly and give up all worldly goods, including estates, endowments, and inheritances. Nuns are devoted to a contemplative and cloistered life of meditation and prayer for the salvation of all. This information is straight from the asec.org or African Sisters Education Collaborative, like one of the schools that you would go to for doing these types of things. Furthermore, I read that all nuns are sisters, but not all sisters are nuns, even though we use the term interchangeably. So for someone ignorant like myself to these things, I had to know what the difference was. I won't go into all of it, but basically, a nun lives in the monastery and their entire life and world revolves around their beliefs and the convent, whereas a sister refers to the term of any apostolic women in religion, and they can actually live or work in their own apartments and can actually minister and work outside of their religious community. They take more simple vows, which can be temporary or perpetual. Sisters are actually able to own property and estates, however, they aren't allowed to make money from them or earn money from them. So essentially, if I understand this correctly, and I'm doing my best, so don't come for me, but nuns are basically a more intense version of sisters, and that's exactly what Mariam was supposed to be. Not a sister, but a frickin' nun. Okay, now aside from the greediness of this woman, the thought that she was basically taking hope away from people by falsely stating that they would help with tuberculosis patients is sickening. Also, the blatant disregard for human life is obvious in the fact that murder, torture, and neglect were among her charges. Mariam's second trial was in February of 1953, and this time she had actually received a 10-year sentence, and it was to be served concurrently or at the same time as her first sentence. So basically 8 years. After learning of her sentence, Mariam was quoted saying, I was wrongfully convicted. I have a clear conscience before God that I did my duty towards these weak creatures who accused me in the trial. To that I say, fuck off, Mariam. I cannot believe that she had the cojones to say that she was innocent and that she was just doing her duty, and then called these victims week. Ugh, it makes me want to stab her with a fork. There was also a bishop that was sentenced to 1 year as well for their complicity. They say that Mariam went on to her sentencing without any emotion. That doesn't seem to be enough to me, but all right. After this, there was apparently even a third trial where she was convicted of illegal detention and then sentenced to another 4 years. It's not exactly clear how many deaths this woman caused, but the authorities were to have thought that 177 people's deaths were from lethal lung infections that were actually a result of negligent homicide. Maybe this included, pretending to be able to medically care for someone that you aren't or can't. Or maybe it was the negligent detention of naked people in the basement. There was said to be an additional 27 people who were thought to have been murdered, and at one point there was a claim that she had killed 500 people. This source went on to say that a bunch of young teenagers, who were girls, that had earlier expressed interest in joining the convent before Mariam's trials had ended, had quickly vanished and were never seen again. It's thought that whomever took over the role of abbess in her absence may have operated more discreetly than Mother Rasputin did. That's absolutely sickening. As recent as 2019, this convent is still in operation, but it does appear to be safer and closer to resembling a quote-unquote typical convent. There are some followers who believe that Mariam was wrongly accused and still praise her. Her motives for her actions were not clear. It could be that her vision on how to do her God's work was just wonky or wrong, or some thought that maybe she was just an opportunist and used religion as a disguise for all of her criminal activities. One thing was for sure, and was proven. Many deaths occurred while she was the abbess. She was ultimately held accountable for some of those deaths. In one London newspaper article I found, they called her, and I quote, "She was called the wickedest woman of the century. This snub-nosed little Greek with black snapping eyes who died in Athens prison hospital." End quote. Ouch, what an awful description of someone's looks. While Mariam was still serving her sentence in Averof prison, she passed away in 1954 when she was the age of 71. This makes me super angry because she barely had to serve any time. Up until her death, she still maintained her innocence, saying that the accusations against her were quote-unquote satanic fictions. Mother Rasputin, however, was found guilty and charged with premeditated murder, and she was held accountable for more than 100 premeditated murders. It said that even though her horrific crimes were made public, there was still people who continued to follow and support her. I'm going to end this horrific story with a quote from her followers in the Espresso newspaper in 2008, which reported that the new nuns prayed daily to the soul of Mariam, and then said, quote, "This monastery had been mercilessly beaten in the past, and they continue to fight it. But we are not afraid, just as Mariam was not afraid when she was condemned to die on a prison bed for crimes that not only she had not committed, but even if she wanted to, her soul would not allow it. She is a holy woman. In fact, she expected that she would have a tragic end like other saints who were tortured by the world before taking their place next to God." End quote. Okay, first off, this woman was not a damn saint. No fucking way. I may not know a lot about saints, but I'm pretty sure that they don't torture and kill people, and especially children. That's so gross. And secondly, if there is anything after this life, there is no way in hell that this woman would end up next to any sort of god. This crazy bitch went straight down and met Hitler in the flesh. Fuck off. And I wish that she had suffered more than she did. Although I hate it, it doesn't surprise me that people still follow and praise her. Cult leaders are often cherished by their brainwashed followers, who somehow can always sidestep whatever crimes they commit if it's in the direct line of their cause or whatever they believe in. Funny how that works. And that, my friends, is the story of Mariam Soulakiotis, Mother Rasputin, serial killer nun, torturer of all, and straight up cunt. I feel like there have been and probably still are so many people who are true sadists and don't do things for the quote-unquote duty to their deity, but rather use their religion as a facade to carry out their sadistic desires. It's people like her that gives so many people out there such a bad taste about religion, which is unfortunate because I know there are many people of faith who do good things for this world instead. I myself, and this is just me personally, like I've said, am not a religious person, but I am passionate about people being able to make the choice for themselves, especially when it comes to religion and what feels right to them. I respect any and all choices of what feels right to someone and what they choose to believe in. However, in any religion, and I don't care which one it is, when a person claims to do something for their religion or faith, or because their God told them to harm another human being in the name of their faith, I will not and cannot get behind that. That is unacceptable and just fucking ridiculous. No religion should be worth hurting other human beings. So I'm curious to know what your guys' thoughts are on this case. How did you feel about Mother Rasputin? Saint or sinner? Let me know. I hope that you guys have a great week ahead, and I will see you guys next week for another episode of The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and listening to another episode of The Kill File. If you want to share your thoughts on what we covered today, suggest a case for me to check out, or if you're just bored and looking for something to do, you can head over to The Kill File's social medias and reach out. We're on Facebook and Instagram as The Kill File, and we're on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out our website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host, and a little bit more about how The Kill File got started. I love hearing from you guys. Come back on Mondays, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye!